All right. Hello, everyone. Here we are today on Wednesday at another Bible study, looking through the book of Ecclesiastes. I noticed the last few videos have received a lot more views than what they were getting previously. So I appreciate to those of you who maybe shared with others the Bible study, and I appreciate those of you who came because you heard the word that there's a Bible study. So yeah, it's always good to meet up and study the Word of God, and um, it's always good for ourselves and for our relationship with others. So today we're going to be in chapters 7 and 8 of Ecclesiastes, um, about over the hump of the book. So we're about over halfway there, and have some pretty good wisdom to be learned in these two chapters. I really hope that the previous chapters have been good. I always enjoy this book, so I hope that you're starting to get a sense of why I would enjoy this book, but more importantly, I hope that you're finding within yourself that you're enjoying the wisdom of this book. Yeah. So, without further ado, let's get into chapter 7. So, before we start chapter 7, you may remember from last week how I mentioned that chapter 6 kind of ties into chapter 7. And in that sense, the last part of chapter 6 and the beginning of chapter 7 are kind of just a part of the wisdom for living under the sun, as it's under the sun, right? So, they're still a little bit tied together, and you could go back to the previous video to find out what I had to say about chapter 6. But here at chapter 7, we start off with a little bit of a I don't know if you'd call it a poem or not, but at least in the two Bibles I have, well, actually in the three Bibles I have, they're kind of written out to look like a little poem. But yeah, this is still why. I mean, it really is very similar to the book of Proverbs here. Every now and then in this book, you see the author writing in the same way, using the same words, same phrases that are used in Proverbs, um, which is interesting because there is still a big contrast to the two books. So let's get into it. All right, so here, chapter 7, verse 1, the contrast of wisdom and folly. A good name is better than precious ointment, and the day of death than the day of birth. It is better to go to the house of mourning than to go to the house of feasting, for this is the end of all mankind, and the living will lay it to heart. Sorrow is better than laughter, for by sadness of face the heart is made glad. The heart of the wise is in the house of mourning, but the heart of fools is in the house of mirth. Excuse me. Um, so here in verse 1 through 4, real dark introduction. So in that first verse, it's important to make a distinction. You might have picked up on it in 2, 3, and 4, but in the first verse, when Solomon is talking about the day of death is better, he's referring to the day of death of someone else. He's not referring to your own death. He's referring to the loss of a loved one, loss of someone who's very close to you. And that sounds really weird, right? When you first get into it, like why is it better the days that a loved one is lost than the days of just happiness and giddiness, I guess. So what I think here is, like he says right here in verse 3, sorrow is better than laughter, for by sadness of face the heart is made glad. I think what he's trying to get at here is that when you are in these really tough moments of these times of death, you just feeling that pain. I think he's trying to say that it's better because you're faced with reality. So if you're just kind of happy all the time, giddy, always laughing, everything's all hunky dory, you know, we can we can really miss out on the times on the serious parts of life. And then not only that, but we can also or we also grow ignorant of the reality of life. And the reality of life is that there is a very dark aspect to it, that being of death, loss, mourning. And that pain is one of the greatest pains we feel. So if when you're in these times, you learn how to deal with it, you learn how to cope with it, but then you also see the reality of life instead of being ignorant to it. And then when you see the reality of it, you can be made someone who can help others who are struggling even more in those times. You can be, I mean, even as simple as a shoulder to cry on, or someone to help counsel another person who's really having a hard time. And that's not to say you can't feel the pain either. I mean, he's not saying like, oh, just shut your heart off, just go through the these times of death and whatnot. No, he's not saying that. He's just saying that it's you. There's this wisdom in the sense of suffering, I guess. Okay, so I don't want to get too bogged down. We'll keep going. So verse 5, a little bit shift of gears right here. It is better for a man to hear the rebuke of the wise than to hear the song of fools. For as the crackling of thorns under a pot, so is the laughter of the fools. This also is vanity. Surely oppression drives the wise into madness, and a bribe corrupts the heart. Better is the end of a thing than its beginning, and the patient in spirit is better than the proud in spirit. Okay, so yeah, we could stop there for a second. So yeah, this big contrast, or this big differentiation between wisdom and folly. Yeah, you'll notice that when you're going through the book of Proverbs, and we see the same thing here. And this crackling of thorns under a pot, I'm pretty sure he's referring to a fire, which is really strange wording, but it's like the laughter of fools, kind of the life of foolishness, right? There appears to be substance, right? Exactly, getting at the definition of vanity, right? When you're looking at this life of a foolish person, maybe your own foolishness, there appears to be substance there, but then you wipe your hand through it real quick, and you might feel that burning sensation, but you can't actually hold it, right? There's nothing solid, there's nothing substantive of it, and then all it is it's just going up in smoke. And that's why I'm saying it's vanity, right? There's not that much point to it. Another really good verse here that kind of begs some more reflection on is verse 8. Better is the end of a thing than its beginning, and the patient in spirit is better than the proud in spirit. Oh, wait. Sorry, no. That's a good verse, but I wanted verse 7. My bad. I got that mixed up. Verse 7, surely oppression drives the wise into madness, and a bribe corrupts the heart. So, yeah, it can be really easy when we're being, I guess what you might say, oppressed. Especially in this day and age, I'm careful not to throw that word around too liberally, I should say. But I guess when we're feeling oppressed, and it may not be so apparent, maybe it's very internal conflicts, it can be really easy to go into madness and to drive you crazy. But I think that's just something where we have to remember our relationship with God and know that this is just a phase. It'll burn out, it's temporary, but God lasts forever. So let's put our faith, let's put our trust on that, and not trust on ourselves to get through this madness. Trust in God, right? But then I really like this: a bribe corrupts the heart. So I I want to think of, or I think of something that is more than just money, I guess. So when we think of bribe, it's like, oh, here's $20, or here's a few $1,000 so you can rig the game, or I don't know, something like that. But I think we should try to think about something deeper than that. What are some ways in which we're bribed, maybe to put God aside and put ourselves ahead? Um, I it's pretty easy to think of the devil, right? When we see these things of the world, it's so easy to get bribed by them. Um, I think something for the devil in America, and from what I've heard, it sounds like the devil works in different ways around the world. But at least here in America, he really he's really behind that force of greed, money, power. It's not so much of the demonic stuff. It's not so much of the possessions and hurting you and stuff like that. Where in other places, but here he really gets into this enticement of wealth and power, and um, even to just like sexual immorality, especially here in America. I mean, geez, you go down a city block and it doesn't take long to see a billboard or a sign where there's some sexually suggestive things. It's just so um, rich in our culture. So he really kind of drives those points right in our face, and just really seeing a bribe corrupts the heart. And what ways do we feel that bribe of, hey, maybe we can get, maybe if I do this little thing, I can get this power, I can get this money. And oftentimes that little thing may not always be good. Um, at first, it may seem fine, it may seem innocent, um, but then it doesn't take long for these things to start looking bad. And sin never happens total darkness. It's always just a very faint dimming of the light, very slowly, very subtly. And yeah, I was really reflecting on that when I was reading that. A bribe corrupts the heart. So okay, we'll move on. Verse 8 is a good 8 though, or is a good verse. But verse 7 I really like. So here at verse 9, be not quick in your spirit to become angry, for anger lodges in the heart of fools. Say not, why were the former days better than these? For it is not from wisdom that you ask this. Wisdom is good with an inheritance, an advantage to those who see the sun. For the protection of wisdom is like the protection of money, and the advantage of knowledge is that wisdom preserves the life of him who has it. Consider the work of God, who can make straight what he has made crooked. So again, a good little section of verses here. Really helping you really trying to challenge you not to become angry. Anger lodges in the heart of fools. So, I mean, I kind of think about that, and most oftentimes when I get angry, it's because I don't consider another person's perspective. And in that word "consider," that means you have to think about it, and that kind of goes hand in hand with wisdom. So, of course, anger could come from foolishness when we see it that way, right? So always try to be thinking of of other people's perspectives when it comes to anger. And then ten's interesting, right? Uh, it kind of reminds me of the scene in The Office when I think it's the last episode where Andy Bernard says, oh, maybe it's not the last episode, but at some point they're all nostalgic, and then Andy Bernard says, "I wish somebody would have told you that I was, or that you were in the good old days when they were happening." I think I botched the quote, but it's something like that. And yeah, I mean, I think that's true. Sometimes we look back and like, man, life was so good back then. Um, but I don't think it's very hard to see where, or the bad places that could go to. It could become very depressing, especially comparing yourself. I mean, think about it. When you're comparing yourself to others, it never ends well because all you want to do is please others. But what happens if you're comparing yourself to your past self? And just kind of think with me for a minute. When you're comparing yourself to your past self, obviously you can't get back what you once were, and you are a totally different person now. So why would you want to go back then? Go back to who you were. Um, in fact, who you were back then is because or was a part of the fact that you were not as old and you were not as wise as you are now. Um, so I think there's this thing, uh, why the present's called the present. Really cherish it, um, and really make the best of now. And then I want to skip here to verse 12, and then we'll move on. Verse 12 is really good. I like this one. For the protection of wisdom is like the protection of money, and the advantage of knowledge is that wisdom preserves the life of him who has it. So I think what he's saying here, for the protection of wisdom is like the protection of money, um, is to some degree, in really rough times, wisdom can act like money. So, I mean, if you think about it, thought experiment, maybe your house burns down, but then maybe you had like $1 million saved in a storage container across town. It's like, okay, well, man, like all my memories, all this wonderful stuff that happened with my house is gone. That's awful. But at least I have some money to where I can stay in a hotel for a little while. Maybe I can buy another house. Um, I still have money to buy some food and whatnot. So um, wisdom is the same thing. And when we get in these really hard times, especially when they're hard emotionally, and then especially in times where we're called to really react quickly. So maybe in disputes, very heated environments where we don't have time to pull ourselves out and really think about it when we're really in the midst of it. When we have wisdom, it's something that we can fall back on and trust. Um, and it's kind of like even when things are going bad, when we have this wisdom, we're able to think how to get out of it, how to make well of it. But then he also says, he doesn't want to draw the comparison too much, to where you might value money too much. But so he says, wisdom preserves the life of him who has it. So that's saying that, I mean, even if you have money, I mean, shoot, maybe you have that $1 million and your house burned down, but what good is that money if you have absolutely no wisdom? So wisdom still supersedes everything. I guess that's what he's been saying in this book, right? Okay, so we'll get into verse 14, kind of out of this poem, like structure, I guess. Verse 14: in the day of prosperity be joyful, and in the day of adversity consider. God has made the one as well as the other, so that man may not find out anything that will be after him. This is a good verse here. So I really find it confusing well, I guess I don't find it confusing. I understand how it can happen, but people tend to only attribute the good things in life, or they only attribute the things that have been given by God to good things in their life. Um, that's easy to do because God is all loving. He's all good, all just. So it's easy to attribute the good things to him. However, you have to consider that there is a chance that the bad things in your life are happening, and maybe those are a gift as well. Sometimes, like he was saying in the beginning of the chapter, when we're going through these hard times, that can kind of breed a lot of growth and a lot of maturity, and help you gain more wisdom. So just because it's something, there's a bad thing going on, um, don't think that God doesn't have a plan for you. That's very important. So 15, In my vain life I have seen everything. There is a righteous man who perishes in his righteousness, and there is a wicked man who prolongs his life in his evil doing. Be not overly righteous, and do not make yourself too wise. Why should you destroy yourself? Be not overly wicked, neither be a fool. Why should you die before your time? It is good that you should take hold of this, and from that withhold not your hand, for the one who fears God shall come out from both of them. So here he makes this um, this really interesting discernment, if you will, um, between, well, I guess maybe middle of the road and then the extremes. So he's warning you, don't be too righteous and don't be too wicked. I think it's really easy to see why you wouldn't want to be too wicked, but um, it's easy to see why you wouldn't want to be too wicked, but it can maybe it's like confusing why I said don't be too righteous, and I think this is why. So um, if we value righteousness more than anything, that could become an idol. And you may ask, well, God is all righteous. Jesus was all righteous. So how could it be that righteousness could become an idol? And idol is synonymous with false God. Well, I have two answers, one short, one long. First one is you're not Jesus and you're not God. So therefore, you can't be all righteous. So that's how it can become an idol. Second answer is a little bit longer. When all you want to do is become righteous, if you take it to the extreme and you want to be the most righteous person, and think about how I just said that, it might cause you to start always trying to outdo other people and get into this weird like do-gooderism where all you're concerned about is maybe your image of how righteous you are, and that's there we see there's a huge aspect of pride, and that can definitely cloud your vision of the sin that's within you, and then that's when the sin can really manifest. So don't be too righteous. It can become an idol. Crazy to think about, but it can. I hope that made sense. Let me know if it doesn't. But we'll move on. Verse 19, wisdom gives strength to the wise man more than 10 rulers who are in a city. Surely there is not a righteous man on earth who does not, or who does good and never sins. So there we go, right there, verse 20. Surely there is not a righteous man on earth who does good and never sins. So even someone who is the most righteous, excluding Jesus, even someone who's the most righteous can, well, I shouldn't say can, but is sinful. So don't ever get confused with just because you have become righteousness, or you have become righteous, doesn't mean that there's not sin still within you. 21, do not take to heart all the things that people say, lest you hear your servant cursing you. Your heart knows that many times you yourself have cursed others. This is a really good little pairing of verses here. Yeah, I think it's pretty plain, right? Like just kind of a food for thought to add on to it. I'm sure it's pretty easy to understand, but why he says what he says in verse 22 to reflect on verse 20. So, I mean, think about the times that you maybe gossiped about someone, and we've all done it. I've done it. Maybe you've gossiped about someone. Maybe you've we're talking trash behind their back. Try to think back in that time. How much did you really mean it? Like, how much did you really hold that conviction that that person was what you were judging them to be? My guess is it's not very strong. You didn't hold that conviction very strongly. My guess is that when you were, and I shouldn't say when you were, because I mean, I put me in this category as well. But in these moments when we're talking about other people, cursing other people, usually it's just to tell everyone that we have an opinion, but then also um, to kind of explain, well, not explain, but to um, maybe kind of put ourselves over the other person. So it's not really about them, but just to kind of show that we're maybe better than them. So in that, knowing that we probably don't actually hold those convictions to be very strong, is the same reason why when people do talk bad about you, when they gossip about you, when they curse you, probably the same reason why you shouldn't take it to heart is because they probably don't hold those convictions very strongly. And I think if they did, like, think about it. If you really were gossiping about someone and you really held that conviction, you really held that notion about that person very strongly, um, I think it would lead to a lot more than just talking about someone behind their back. I don't want to get too far into that, but you can take it from there. So here at verse 23, all this I have tested by wisdom. I said, I will be wise, but it was far from me. That which has been is far off and deep, very deep. Who can find it out? Kind of an interesting verse there. Um, yeah, we'll get into this. Next passage is good. Verse 25, I turn my heart to know and to search out and to seek wisdom and the scheme of things and to know the wickedness of folly and the foolishness that is madness. And I find something more bitter than death, the woman whose heart is snares and nets and whose hands are fetters. He who pleases God escapes her, but the sinner is taken by her. Behold, this is what I found, says the preacher, while adding one thing to another to find the scheme of things, which my soul has sought repeatedly, but I have not found. One man among 1,000 I found, but a woman among all these I have not found. See, this alone I found, that God made man upright, but they have sought out many schemes. This is a really good passage here. Obviously, people who are super anti-Christianity would eat this passage up and say, "Oh, misogyny." I really don't think that's what's going on here. I don't think he's referring to an actual woman, or you could make an argument that he's saying women in general in verse 26, but I think this is a little bit more indicative of situations of sin. So we are sinners, right? And then there are things in this world that can pull us to that and then highlight the sin, accent it, make its glow brighter. So I think that's what that woman represents, is something like that. See, and I think it's true because he says, he who pleases God escapes her, but the sinner is taken by her. So these things that can be really tempting, when we know that when we could see that situation or that thing for what it is, we see the snares, the nets, the hands of fetters, we can go to God and we can avoid it. But if we are still dead to our sin, we fall victim to it. And then furthermore, he's saying that even in meeting so many people, it's like 1 out of 1,000, 0 out of 1,000 are actually really good, and it's pretty profound, I think. Needless to say, this is a passage about the root of all things is sin. So take that theme and then peruse over that passage once more, if you would like. So here we get into chapter 8. This is a pretty good chapter. So here at chapter 8, who is like the wise, and who knows the interpretation of a thing? A man's wisdom makes his face shine, and the hardness of his face is changed. So I think this is just kind of a wrap up of what he was saying in 6 and 7, just kind of wisdom. But then here and for most of the rest of the book until the very end, he's just going to be talking about what that concept of life under the sun. So, verse 2, I say, keep the king's command because of God's oath to him. Be not hasty to go from his presence. Do not take your stand in an evil cause, for he does whatever he pleases. For the word of the king is supreme, and who may say to him, what are you doing? Whoever keeps a command will know no evil thing, and the wise heart will know the proper time and the just way. For there is a time and a way for everything, although man's trouble lies heavy on him. For he does not know, for he does not know what is to be, for who can tell him how it will be? No man has power to retain the spirit or power over the day of death. There is no discharge from war, nor will wickedness deliver those who are given to it. All this I observed while applying my heart to all that is done under the sun, when man had power over man to his hurt. So at face value, when I first read this, I thought, why is he telling me that I should always submit to the king? But I think it goes a lot deeper than that. And what he's saying here is that, hey, even kings are sinful. Kings are men. And then you could say queens are women. But, man is sinful, and every person has their sin in their heart. So when you look to a ruler, you can't think of them as anybody above anyone else. I'd like to think that there's that cliche, death is a great equalizer. I think you could also go a step further and say that sin is the great equalizer, in the sense that we are all sinful. So what he's saying here is this king is evil, but this is not a hill that you need to die on. Kind of go with the flow. And then also, too, if you know how to put up with this evil ruling, you grow in wisdom, because it's that adversity, that challenge that's right in your face and always hitting you. That's when we can grow. We learn how to deal with it, and then we grow stronger in our ways of solving these problems. So he's saying, look, this is not a hill you need to die on, because the king is just as sinful as the next guy. And it can actually be a good thing, because it could grow your wisdom. And then here we are at verse 10. Those who fear God will do well. Verse 10, then I saw the wicked buried. They used to go in and out of the holy place, and were praised in the city where they had done such things. This also is vanity, because the sentence against an evil deed is not executed speedily. The heart of the children of man is fully set to do evil. Though a sinner does evil 100 times and prolongs his life, yet I know that it will be well with those who fear God, because they fear before him. But it will not be well with the wicked, neither will he prolong his days like a shadow, because he does not fear before God. So this is kind of an extension of what was being said in the previous chapter. Kind of saying, how come those who are the least deserving of death often get it? I think we kind of see this, right? We've seen people in our lives who, maybe it's people maybe it's people just kind of in the media, people so undeserving of death, but then at the same time, like, all of these wicked people, they never get caught, and then the extremely wicked people, somehow they always evade death. Some innocent person could just get hit by a car, and then that's it. But then the most wicked man can run out in the streets all day and not get hit. That can be what life seems to be. But it's important to see here that he still says it's important to fear God because, and not literally fear God, but it's important to fear God in the sense that at least when you fear God, obviously you won't be wicked. But then also, here, hold on one sec. Let me go through my notes real quick. Oh, sorry. Okay, sorry that took a long time. But you got to think about it. Maybe there is a reason why the wicked person doesn't exactly get what he or she may deserve, and maybe there's a reason why that the person who is least deserving of the bad things gets it. Um, I this is when you really kind of have to trust in God and really reaffirm your faith in Him, because here I'll refer back to, I think this is one of the greatest verses, well, two verses in the Old Testament, in my opinion. We're here at, you don't have to flip to it, but just listen here at Isaiah in 55, verse 8 and 9. For my thoughts are not, this is God saying this, for my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. I think this verse should be applied to just about everything that happens in our lives, especially in relationship with God, because we are very intelligent beings, especially compared to other beings on this earth, but we are the most intelligent that we know. But we know that God is like you may even say perfectly intelligent, the absolute most intelligent being there is. So it would makes I would actually maybe distrust God, maybe my faith be weakened a little bit if I could figure out everything that God can figure out, right? If like if God if I could figure out everything and could know everything that God knows, then is he exactly God, right? So there's this part of God where there has to be a reason for this, and God can use these maybe bad instances, and maybe good instances and things undeserving, um, to to progress something that good could come out of it, something that is within his will. So always keep in mind that there is a higher purpose, and that's why Solomon says, look, still fear God though, because divine judgment is best, divine intelligence is best. So since there is a reason for it, you still should trust in him. um, so we'll continue. Here at verse 14, there is a vanity that takes place on earth, that there are righteous people to whom it happens according to the deeds of the wicked, and there are wicked people to whom it happens according to the deeds of the righteous. There again, right? The righteous receive what the wicked should, and the wicked receive what what the righteous should. Um, for I don't need to repeat myself. I said that this is also vanity. Here at verse 15 continues, and I commend joy for man has nothing better under the sun but to eat and drink and be joyful, for this will go with him in his toil through the days of his life that God has given him under the sun. When I applied my heart to know wisdom and to see the business that is done on earth, how neither day nor night do one's eyes see sleep, then I saw all the work of God, that man cannot find out the work that is done under the sun. However much man may toil in seeking, he will not find it out. Even though a wise man claims to know, he cannot find it out. So, going back to what I mentioned in the first video, Solomon, the author of this book, he the story goes that Solomon was the wisest person in all of Israel. You could go back to that first video, and you'll hear why he was. But so he's the most wise person. And I mean, for someone to write Ecclesiastes, Proverbs, and I mean, Songs of Solomon, which aren't as pertinent, but still, you have someone who writes these books. Needless to say, they're probably a pretty wise person, maybe one of the most wise people out there. So someone this wise, even they will say, look, I have thought about all of this. I've lost sleep thinking about all of this, but you still can't figure out what God is thinking. And I think that's just so important, because if we just remember that God the Isaiah 55, 8 and 9, God sees things differently than we do. He thinks differently than we do. He sees things better. He thinks better, and his plan is better overall than what we think. I was just thinking of this plan, but it's like imagine a maze, and you're the person within the walls, but God is guiding you to the end. God sees the end, and he knows how to get you there. But then all you see and all you experience is all this time of torment of just being lost. It seems like you're lost, and it seems like you're not going anywhere. And then there's this monotony of just walls turning left, right, and you don't know where to go. Maybe you go the wrong way, and God's like, no, not that way, right? Because we can still choose. We still have free will. But God sees the end, and if you just trust in him, he will guide you through that maze. He will get you through that suffering. So God is that he can look down, and it's really interesting, because it's not the physical. I mean, obviously he can look down on the physical world, but he can look down on time too, right? God exists out of time, and he can see what is going to happen. He can see the possibilities, and through that, it's like, why shouldn't we trust him? He has the best perspective. And I think that that's really reaffirming when we put it into perspective that way. Yeah, of course I shouldn't be able to see how God sees, right? Because we can see in a way that is like how God sees, but we can't actually see how God sees, right? We're made in the image of God. It doesn't mean we're made to be God. So I think if there's any lesson you can take away from this video, I would say it's that lesson right there, is that in times of trouble, times of tribulation, adversity, suffering, always remember that God has a plan, and God has taken you to the end of that maze. And when you're going through these times, you're going to grow, right? Even going back to chapter 7, when we're suffering with the loss of loved ones, there is a part of us that's growing with reality. We're seeing the world for how it is, and we're growing wise, and we're growing spiritually, and more emotionally strong. So take that away, that there's a purpose for what is going on. And then also too, kind of a side note, not really talked about in these last 2 chapters, but even in these times of suffering, times where things seem pointless, times where maybe you just don't know what to do, there could be some pain there, especially in the suffering, emotional suffering. There's pain there. Also too, God has felt that as well, right? When Jesus came, Jesus was, in a sense, left abandoned by his Father and left to die on the cross in the most horrific, most painful way that humanity has come up with. And Jesus is the Son of God. So God, literally God, feels our pain, has felt our pain, and he hurts too when we hurt. But at the same time, there's a plan in it all. So I hope that this has been helpful. Um, yeah, also too. Sometimes in this wisdom literature, it can be really easy to just go through lines and like, oh, okay, that's good advice. But I hope I'm showing to you that there's a way to really kind of get deep into the text and relate it to your life. And then also when you get deep, you can get more out of it, and you could get more out of it into your life. So yeah, there's chapter chapter 7 and 8. Um, Next week is 9 and 10. So second to the last video next week. We have some interesting chapters. Still, he's going back to life under the sun again. So yeah, that'll be good. Also, too, I would like to extend to you, um, maybe suggest some other books that you'd like to go through, or maybe that you'd like to see me go through. Uh, I don't. Yeah. Anyways, I would like to, maybe if I'm going to do another series of videos, I would like to for the next book to be in the New Testament. Probably not a gospel. That'll take a really long time, just because the epistles are a lot shorter. Um, we could get through it a lot better, and then not Revelation at all, at all. So, um, yeah, there's a video 7 and 8. I hope you enjoyed it. Please, if you haven't watched the other videos, go watch them. A lot of great wisdom and knowledge to be gained from them. A lot of good insight, and then also share with your friends. Maybe you have friends who are Christians who need a Bible study. Send them this way, and then maybe you have friends who aren't Christians and say, hey, check out these videos. I try to explain in ways that even people who may not be Christian could understand. So I would encourage you to share with your friends and to keep up with the Bible studies. And then also to ask questions. If I said something that didn't make sense, you're always welcome to comment. And then for dialogue, we could definitely tweet at me at tmauk_2, at tmauk_2. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know what you think. And thanks for watching. Thanks for making it this long. And I will see you next week. So take care and keep reading the Word of God. All right. See you later.